Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome back, I should say, for those of you who are repeat visitors. This is our, I don't know, must be our 25th, 26th, maybe even more, closing on 30th webinar of 2021. Which brings up the horrifying thought that one day we'll be doing the 100th webinar. I guess it's something to look forward to. I am joined today by James. Hopefully, I have been able to set things up such that he can use his camera. Hopefully, he will be able to show us his face. Do you have a face, James?
I do indeed, although I do have this rather large pilot's headset covering most of it, but I am here.
Oh, fab. For some reason, I can't see you myself, but I will assume that it's fine. If anyone has any problems, please let us know in the chat or in the Q&A, because I will not necessarily know if something has gone wrong. As I said a moment ago, I'm joined today by James. James, why don't you introduce yourself first? We'll do things backwards this week for fun.
Sure. Well, hi guys. So my name's James and I'm a senior admissions consultant. So really it's my job to have conversations with lots of students and parents, find out more about you and your application plans, and then to see if it's something that we would be able to support you with. Yeah, that's me.
My name is Matt. I'm also here from UniAdmissions, where I'm the head of research, and my job is to make sure that all of the things that we're going to lay out in terms of ideas and suggestions in the coming slides and hopefully in the Q&A afterwards as well is all backed up by the very best quality of information and data and proof that we can manage. So today we're going to be talking specifically about international applications. We know that a lot of students are keen to apply from outside of the UK to UK universities. And so we're going to be sort of lifting the lid on a few of the things that we think are really valuable to know, and to give you a little bit of a taste of the way we work, and also share a few tips for really making the most out of your application. Next week, for those of you who have already decided what you're going to study, we're going to be talking about studying law. Or if you're thinking about studying law, please join us again for that, where we'll be exploring law, and then I think we'll be going back through the subjects over the coming weeks. So there'll be medicine and all sorts of other things to come. So if you're not interested in law, please do stay tuned, because hopefully there'll be something that is relevant to you in the next few weeks. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about applying as an international applicant. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the differences between the United States and the United Kingdom in terms of the university application process. I'm not an expert on the US process, so I'll only be able to speak about it very briefly. I didn't get into any of the US universities I applied to. Perhaps I should have set my sights lower. Harvard didn't fancy me. Then we'll be talking about what your chance of getting into Oxford and Cambridge are. And then finally, what specific things you can do to improve your chances to make sure that you're making the best application you possibly can be. So the first thing to talk about is the differences between the UK universities and the universities in the United States. So the thing to understand is that the application processes are completely different. If you want to apply to Harvard or Stanford or Chicago or one of the many, many good universities in the US, if you take the essay that you write for them and you just copy paste it into your application to Oxford or Cambridge or UCL, that's not going to work. They're looking for something very different from what the US universities are. And so you need to make sure that you're writing a new statement, a new essay for that. The UK requirements they're quite strict as to the sorts of things you should be talking about. But the good news is they are very simple. James, have you had much contact in the last few months with students who are thinking of applying to both the US and the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So that does come up quite a lot. And actually, really interestingly, Matt, over the last, I'd say over the last year, we've had so many more US students actually wanting to apply to the UK. It seems to be a real trend there that a lot of US sort of students are turning their sights towards the UK. I think there's been a little bit of a change in the way the US universities are sort of operating and selecting students. So a lot of US students are sort of thinking about Oxbridge now. But yeah, it's quite a common thing for students to want to apply to both. And like you're saying, I think it's really important to know that the application is very different. I think we're going to go into this in more detail, but Oxford and Cambridge are quite academically ruthless, whereas I think the US universities, they want to know a little bit more about you and your personality and all of these things, which is excellent. Whereas Oxbridge are a little bit more sort of down to the test scores and the academics and things.
Absolutely. I don't know what's happened with the subtitles there. I don't remember you saying that at all, James.
Who knows?
Well, it's gone now. If no one noticed it, that was a bit of fun. I don't know how that happened.
We'll add that to the blooper reel.
Yes. Yes, if you're applying to university in the UK, the first thing that's good about it is that it all goes through one fairly easy to use computer system called UCAS, which stands for University and College Admissions Service. You can apply to all of the universities in the UK through the same thing. You send one personal statement that goes to all of the universities. If you're in a rush, you could probably do the whole thing in a couple of days, as long as you didn't want to spend very long on a personal statement. We do not recommend that, but the UCAS process is fairly straightforward in terms of filling out the forms. The thing to understand is that unlike the US, as James began to talk about a moment ago, your application to UK universities will be just about how good you are at academic subjects. They won't be interested in whether you are good at sport. They won't be interested in whether you have donated a lot of money to the university. They won't be interested if your father went to the university. They won't be interested in whether you have a lovely personality or whether you have raised lots of money for charity or started a small business. All these things are great, especially the charity, but you are not going to get into Oxford because of how good you are at raising money for charity if you're not good at maths and you want to study maths. And to sort of back this up, I have a little video clip to play. This is taken from the Cambridge Online Open Day last year. And this is one of the admissions tutors at Cambridge explaining how he goes about selecting students.
I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
So there you have it, straight from one of the Cambridge admissions tutors. He's talking about English specifically there, but this is something we'd really try to push home to students, which is if you want to study chemistry, you've got to be good at chemistry, not good at rugby or at chess, just chemistry. And is that something that students find surprising, do you find, James?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, funnily enough, we recently had an open day where we were talking about sort of work experience and also wider reading. And I think it's really important, when I'm speaking to sort of parents and students and I'm asking them what they've been doing outside of school to benefit their application. I hear a lot of time things like the Duke of Edinburgh, things like that, sporting achievements, which is fantastic. When you get to Oxford and Cambridge, you're going to have a fantastic opportunity to pursue those interests. But in Oxford and Cambridge's decision-making process, they're not bothered. So you need to be doing things that are related to your subject. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, exactly. For example, we talked a little bit about the value of sport there. You're not going to get into study, say, maths at Cambridge because you're good at rugby. However, if you have been doing some kind of interesting statistical research into some aspect of rugby, that's brilliant. That's going to do you the world of good. But you need to be able to show that really clear link between the things you're doing outside of your A-levels or your IB or whatever high school diploma you're doing. You need to be able to show that it's relevant to the subject you're applying for in one step. You can't be taking, 8 or 9 steps to go, I was captain of the dance team, which showed the leadership skills, which is good for me to do management. It's not very convincing, unfortunately, particularly since, and this is one of the reasons that the extracurriculars don't have a big impact in the Oxbridge application process, is pretty much everyone is going to have them. If everyone's done the Duke of Edinburgh, it doesn't matter. If everyone's a good pianist, unless they're applying for music, again, it's not going to be the deciding factor because it's not a useful way of telling the difference between the students. This brings us on to thinking about how to maximize your chances of getting into Oxford or Cambridge, depending on where you want to go, or even to UCL or LSE. All of the ideas we'll be talking about kind of work across the board. Which brings us, James, to my favorite part of the presentation. Can you guess what's about to happen?
Oh, it's not the pie charts, is it?
Oh, of course it's the pie chart.
Fantastic.
James, take it away.
Chart.
Everyone loves the pie chart.
Okay, so we have this pie chart really to more sort of clearly demonstrate how the universities are actually going to be weighting the different parts of your application. So I think that's really, really important. We know that there's a personal statement. We know that there's a test specific to the course. We know that there's going to be an interview. But what the pie chart is demonstrating is specifically how they are weighted in relation to one another. Now, it does vary slightly from course to course, but as a really good rule of thumb, how this works is that 30% of your application will be based on your academics, so your school grades. Another 30% will be based on the admissions test, so maybe the BMAT for medicine, the TSA for PPE. Another 30% will be based on your interview. And then that final 10% we call other, and that's sort of a combination of your personal statements, your academic references. And I think that's really important to know, because actually a lot of times students will come to me and they say, well, I got, 3 A stars or whatever the equivalent is in your sort of local curriculum. And that's fantastic. But what we've got to remember really is that so will everybody. Everybody will have excellent academics. And as you can see, they're only worth about 30%. So I think that's a really useful way to start thinking about where you need to be focusing in terms of your preparation as well. Test and interview, huge part of this process.
Fab. Thanks, James. As James says, the reason we rate the admissions test so highly in the way that we approach our sort of strategies for working with students is because it's the one piece of evidence the university has that's going to be the same for all the students. All the students will have done this same test on the same day. And this is particularly important for international students who might be, studying the IB in Malaysia or the, whatever the high school leaving diploma in Argentina is. They're going to have had very different experiences of school. But when it comes to comparing them with UK students, they're all going to be doing the same test. And that's what allows you to make a meaningful comparison when they're all being asked the same questions under the same kinds of conditions. What about your chances? So the first thing to say is that it is more difficult to get into Oxford or Cambridge from outside the UK than it is from inside the UK. It's roughly twice as difficult, I would say, which I appreciate may feel a little unfair, but there are a number of reasons for it that we're gonna go through. There are about 30,000 UK applicants to Oxford and Cambridge each year, and there are about a further 20,000 from outside the UK. So it's roughly a 3-to-2 ratio in terms of people who are applying. But when you actually get into the university, something like 20% of those UK applicants, so about 6,000 of them get in, compared to about 2,000 of the international applicants. So although it's a 3-to-2 ratio of applications, you end up looking at more like a 6-to-2, 6-to-1 kind of setup once you're in there. So why is that? Now, there are a number of reasons. The biggest reason is that international students are much more likely to apply for the most competitive courses. Obviously, this makes sense to an extent. If you're going to go to Oxford, obviously you want to do the most impressive, most prestigious stuff. If you want to go to Cambridge, you want to study maths at Trinity. If you want to go to Oxford, you want to study PPE at Balliol. But this means that a lot of international students, very close to 10% of all applications from international students, that's all applications from people outside of the UK, are for one course, which is PPE at Oxford. There's very nearly 2,000 applicants a year to study PPE at Oxford from outside the UK, which is an absolutely enormous number. And it means that it's in fact larger than the number who apply from inside the UK. And it means that the international students aren't just competing with the UK students, they're also competing principally with other international students, which pushes the numbers down. And this also means that international students tend not to look at the less well-known courses at Oxford or Cambridge. So looking through the data in some of the work I've done, what we found is there will be maybe 2,000 applicants to study PPE at Oxford from outside of the UK, and there will be 5 to study classics. And half of the ones who apply to study for classics will get in, and 4 or 5% of those who apply to study PPE are in. So you'll have just as many students studying each subject, but so many more will have applied to study PPE that they simply crowd each other out. The other thing to think about here is medicine. I'm sure this is something you talk to our international applicants about a lot, James?
Yes, in terms of the course choice.
In terms of the cap as well on the number of places.
Oh, I see. Yeah, absolutely. So it is. So it's one of those sort of potentially you'd say unfair aspects of the application, but it's reality.
I would say it's very frustrating. And this is that the UK government has decided to set a limit on the number of non-UK doctors it will train each year. The reason, of course, being that the government needs doctors to work in the UK. And so they don't want the doctors escaping, basically. And so there is only a small number of places for students outside of the UK to study medicine inside the UK. So something like 700 students will apply each year to study medicine at Oxford from outside the UK. And they're probably not aware of this when they apply, but there are only 10 places. So that's 70 students applying for each place. By contrast, there are more than 10 places for UK students. So a UK student will need to be in something like the top 10%, the top 5% of students applying to medicine that year to get into medicine at Oxford. But an international student, because they're fighting over just 10 places, they're going to need to be in maybe the top 1, 2, 3% of applicants. And that just makes the whole thing much more challenging because there are simply fewer places. And this is a really big contributor to how many fewer international students are successful in applying to Oxford and Cambridge, because we talked about that 10% or so of students who are applying for PPE. On top of that, there is another 10 to 15% who are applying to study medicine. And so all of a sudden you have nearly a quarter of the students applying from outside the UK are applying for the 2 hardest to get into courses. And I think that is the largest factor at work there. The other thing to say is that these legal limits apply to all universities in the UK for medicine. So it's not just Oxford and Cambridge, but King's, Keele, Exeter, all of them have a hard legal cap on the number of non-UK doctors they're allowed to train. And so if you are applying to study medicine in the UK, it is fantastic if you get in, but I would not I would make sure you have a backup option in other countries, whether that's going to Humanitas in Milan, whether it's applying for medical school in your own country. Whatever you do, I wouldn't put all of your efforts on Oxford or Cambridge or even UCL, because the competition is just so fierce. So then, what strategies do we recommend for enhancing your chances as an international student? Because it is more challenging, there's no doubt about that, but there are still things that you can do to improve your chances. The first thing to do is to think really carefully about the subject you're applying to. You might want to apply to PPE at Oxford, but you should have a look at where the land economy at Cambridge, which is a fairly similar but less competitive course, is also something you'd be interested in. That's going to boost your chances immediately because you're going to be competing with fewer students for more places. Similarly, if you've had your heart set on biology or chemistry, or perhaps engineering, take a look at subjects like material science or another subject that is a little bit different from what you might be studying at school, but has most of the same sort of academic components. And these subjects tend to have a smaller number of applicants, and so your chances are going to be better there. The next thing to say is, particularly if you are not a native English speaker, or if you are not studying in English as your main sort of language of learning, you want to be preparing for that interview really well in advance. I would say if you're planning to apply this year, you should already be practicing for the interview, because again, you're going to be going up against people who only speak English, who have only ever been taught in English, who can only read in English, and who are going to have a little bit of an edge in terms of the language skill and the presentation there. Now, if you speak English and Mandarin and Cantonese and French, then you're going to be in a fantastic position once you get into the university to bring those languages into your work. But ultimately, the interview isn't going to be in Cantonese. And so you need to be making sure that your English is really up to that standard. And that's the other thing to think about, which is when you come to write your personal statement, something we're going to be talking about in more detail in a couple of weeks, I believe. It's really helpful to think about what your experiences as an international student bring to the application, what they bring to the university, and how they make you more interesting, more diverse, a more curious person. Hopefully, there's a reason that you want to travel to the other side of the world to study, and you should bring that into your application, because it can really help you stand out, particularly when you're comparing yourself with someone who, you know, lives in London and wants to go to Oxford because it's the best, but hasn't given it as much thought as a kind of life choice as you might have done. And the last thing, just to return to the subject of medicine, is, as we mentioned earlier, in the context of the pie chart, if you want to study medicine at Oxford or Cambridge or in the UK in general, the best thing you can do is get an absolutely amazing BMAT score. That is going to be the thing that sets you apart in terms of getting to the interview. And you are going to need to get a really high score to get that far, an 8 or a 9 in both of the sections, and ideally a 3 or a 4 in the essay. It's just challenging, and because of this legal cap, you have to be, you know, really the best if you want to stand a chance of getting into Oxford or Cambridge particularly. Now, probably that all sounds a little bit frightening, but the good news is James is now going to talk us through a little bit of the support that we here at UniAdmissions are able to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it is a bit of a daunting prospect to be applying from overseas. I think really the strategy that you need to adopt is to start working on this as early as possible, but actually more so to be working effectively. So it's not always about the amount of time, but it's actually what you're doing with that time. So, you know, if you haven't guessed by now, at UniAdmissions, we're a prep school. So we're supporting students who are applying for, you know, the competitive courses at Oxford and Cambridge, and also sort of medicine at beyond Oxford and Cambridge too. We work with a lot of international students every year, and it's something we do really, really well with. very, very familiar with the sort of different curriculums and how things translate from country to country. But we have programs of support, basically to assist you in your preparation and to give you the strongest possible chance of ultimately getting an offer out of this, which obviously is what this is all about. So generally speaking, there are 4 parts to a program. I think the next slide will reveal the first one. Excellent, which is one-to-one tuition. So the idea of tuition really is for you to be working with a tutor who themselves has studied the subject that you're applying for. So for example, if you're applying for medicine at Oxford, we'd want you to be working with a tutor who themselves is or has studied medicine at Oxford. The idea of tutoring really, I think it's kind of quite clear, but it's about identifying where your strengths and weaknesses are within this process, and then working on systematically improving those over the year. So you'll be working with your tutor to really get a good sense of what needs to be done for you, and then setting a plan in place for that. And the next part. Sorry,
James. Yeah, I was just taking a drink of water.
Oh, terrible time. Yes, so after every session with your tutor, they will write a report for you, and I think that's quite important. Both the student and parents, parents, we would like you to feel engaged in this process too, and students, we would like you to feel like you have a really clear understanding of how you are progressing. So after every session with your tutor, they will write a report, sort of just detailing what you've done together, what you're doing well at, where those gaps are that you need to continue to improve. And I think that's a really good way of you feeling in control of this and having a good understanding of sort of what's happening over the year.
Fab. Thanks, James. I wanted to talk and take over and let James have a glass of water for a moment. Talk a little bit about our resources. So we put an enormous amount of emphasis on preparation for the admissions test, whether that's for subjects at Oxford or Cambridge or to study medicine. And that's led us to develop our own range of textbooks at substantial expense and effort. I know Toby works very hard on these. And so with all of our programs comes complete access to our library of textbooks. Literally, I should imagine now tens of thousands of pages of strategies, of teaching, of practice questions, of answers, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of sample questions for every admissions test. And these are available not just in a book format like the chap in this picture is showing, but is also through our online learning portal, which I'm hopefully going to be able to show a little clip of. Sometimes this doesn't work. So our online portal is called the Preparation Portal. And this contains, I think we're using an example from physics here today, all of the different subjects, areas that you might need for the admissions test you're going to be sitting, all of the different parts of the syllabus, all the different things you need to know to be able to answer those questions, and an absolutely enormous bank of practice questions for you to work through. So the questions are set at the same level of difficulty and in the same format as the actual test itself will be. And you can work through these to really make sure that you are working to the timing of the test, but also, performing to the right level. And you can also complete the past papers for each test. So if you want to know, for example, how well you're going to do on the, in this instance, the engineering test in 2021, one of the easiest ways you can test how well you think you're going to do is to practice using the test from 2020 and 2019 and 2018 and 17, 16, 15, and so on. And all of those are available here for you to practice with, which I think is really the most effective way of getting good at those admissions tests, is to have done so much practice that when you get into the room and are faced by the real questions, you sort of take a sigh of relief because of how much easier it is than you had expected, because you're just so damn well prepared. But But it's not all about the focus on the test. We're particularly proud of what we call our enrichment seminars. James, have you had the chance to refresh your throat?
I'm ready to go. Yes, absolutely.
Tell us about the enrichment seminars, James.
So actually, one of my favourite parts of a program, actually. So every week, every Sunday throughout the year, you would be, if you would sort of be working with us, you'd be joining one of our enrichment seminars. So we have different streams related to different subjects. But the idea is that every week we're looking at a different topic within your subject. So, I mean, for example, one week, if you're studying economics, you might be looking at choice architecture, game theory. There's a different topic every week. You can come along to the seminar, some pre-reading to do beforehand. The seminars themselves are sort of small groups, so replicating, you know, an Oxbridge style sort of tutorial or supervision. And they're live, they're very interactive, sorts of sort of discussion and debate. But the idea really is to explore those different topics, help you to really delve into areas of your subject that you're interested in. And I think the impact of that is in the interview, where you are expected to be able to confidently discuss those areas of interest for you. So you're sort of building up that practice every week throughout the year. And also sort of fulfilling part of the wider reading aspect of an application too, because you'll be doing wider reading before each seminar. So I just think they're a fantastic way to really engage with your subject, and they are sort of have translatable sort of impacts on the different parts of the application too. And I don't know whether I'm supposed to be doing this, Matt, but I sometimes sneak in to have a look for topics that I'm interested in, even though I'm obviously not applying to university.
Oh, yes, they are really good, and they're one of the things that I think sets us apart as a company from some of the alternatives available, which is not just to practice the admissions test or the interview as a thing on its own, but to really simulate the learning experience of the university to get you properly prepared ahead of time, so that even if your application isn't successful, you'll still have come out with a lot of useful transferable skills that you can use at any university for any course, rather than finding that you didn't get into Oxford and so the whole thing was, you know, the whole thing didn't really work out. The final component of our programs are the day courses. These are my favorites, but that's because I like spending time with other people. And unfortunately, for the past couple of years, thanks to the horrible virus, these have been held online, which I'm very sad about because I really enjoy meeting the students. It's one thing to spend all of this time, you know, working away in the background, but it feels very different when there are 50 or 60 young people looking and listening and enjoying the work that you've been able to do. So these are exclusive to the students who are working with us on our programs. They focus on the admissions test and on the interview. I believe the personal statement as well now. And these are full day, sometimes full weekend courses, just giving you the opportunity to really focus on what you need to be doing in order to get that interview, get that place. And the chance to spend a little bit of time with other students, you know, alongside the enrichment seminar, be a little bit sociable, and to really test yourself in that group context. We find that after, you know, weeks and weeks of sort of preparing on their own, having this kind of group preparation, particularly for the tests, is something that students really appreciate, and gives you the chance to see how you're doing compared with the people you're competing against, which if like me, you're not very good, can be quite a dispiriting experience. But I'm sure for some people who are good, it's far more exciting. And the good news is that all of this does more or less pay off. Our success rates for the last year, we have complete data. We were able to get in students to Oxford and Cambridge at more than 3 times the rate that they are without our support. And this goes both for international students and for UK students. In fact, I believe we would probably have been very close to 50-50 UK international for this particular data set, although I'd have to double check. And our success rates compare really, really flatteringly with even the most expensive schools in the UK. We do get more people into Oxford than Eton, although on the other hand, our buildings aren't as nice. So if Eton phoned me up and they wanted to give me a job, I would be tempted, because it's a touch nicer than our office. Not to not to cast any aspersions on Rohan's choice of real estate. Now, I expect that some of the things we've talked about here may feel a little intimidating, and it's possible that they're giving you second thoughts about working with us. So, James, can you do a little bit of reassurance as you tell us about tell everyone about the kind of students that we're most interested in?
Yeah, so I think there's two things that are important in a student. Obviously, there are benchmarks academically that the universities are looking for specific courses. So the reality is you do have to hit those, and the higher the better. But actually, based on what we're able to do for students, the thing that I'm looking for more than anything else is attitude. How much do you actually want to go to Oxbridge and study this course? How hard are you willing to work this year? I think those things are really important. There's a lot of structure in a program. There's a lot of input. There really is a lot there, but there also is a big emphasis on students to be working hard. So that's something that we sort of want to ascertain when we have a chat with you, just to see, whether you feel like you want to be putting in the kind of effort that it takes. So yes, attitude sort of trumps academics, in my opinion. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think to a substantial extent, that's the important thing. I spend a lot of time, particularly around the day courses. One of the things I like to do is to go down and do some of the mock interviews. And one of the things I like to be able to think that I can do is to tell from that mock interview where the student will get in or not. And I do tend to be quite candid with them. And one of the easiest ways to tell a student isn't going to get in is if they present themselves as if they want to go to Oxford to be a teacher, not to be a student. Students who are arrogant, who show off, who aren't interested in listening, who are only really interested in speaking. Students like that, they tend not to get in, and we tend to avoid them. We would much rather have a student who is curious and interested and has the right attitude than a student who has a worse attitude and higher grades, because it tends to be the attitude that matters in the end. Because if everyone has good grades, the judgment tends to be made on the basis of attitude, and bad attitude causes all sorts of problems, not just at university, but in later life. You might be shocked to hear. One of the ways that we ensure that the students we work with are sort of the right kind of students is through what we call the Student Honour Code. This is just a framework that we present to students at the beginning of their programme to explain to them how we expect them to work to get the most out of their course. The idea here is to make each student accountable for their own learning. They can't blame the tutor or their mum if things don't work out. It's their application ultimately, so it's their job to make sure they do what they need to. It ensures that students make the most of the resources that we provide them with. If we give you 20 practice papers for the admissions test, you only do one practice paper. We probably know why you didn't do very well on the test. And the last thing is that it's about making sure that we do the very best for our tutors. We spend a lot of money and time and effort making sure that we have really good quality tutors. I like to use the example of one of my favourite tutors, who is a PhD mathematician at Cambridge. He is a brilliant guy, fantastic mathematician, very bad at emails, very bad at paperwork. And so part of the Student Honour Code is making sure that you take the tutors you're working with seriously, that you don't mess them around by randomly cancelling appointments or being difficult. working with tutors who are good at maths, not good at admin, and we try to ensure that they don't have to do any admin, and we like to ask the students to do the same. Again, this is just about making sure that we're cultivating the right attitude, and also about making sure that students are prepared not only for university but for life afterwards. As an employee who messes with people around, you may find that you have to look for a new job quite quickly. So we like to make sure that it's a professional environment kind of across the board. People are, on the whole, very happy with our services. You can read about them on Trustpilot. Every week I ask, please, if you've really enjoyed this webinar, please give it a nice review on Trustpilot, because then my boss will be impressed. I'm not going to leave these up too long. I really recommend going on there and reading them yourself rather than looking at the two I've picked out, as we would want you to have the full spectrum of opinion rather than just the ones that I've been able to screenshot. But as I say, please do tell my boss how good these webinars are by writing a nice review on Trustpilot. And two things sort of finally. The first of these is the cooling off period. We take very seriously making sure that the students who work with us are the right students, that we are the right service, that the relationship we build with the student and the parent and with the tutor, that all of these things work well and properly. And so if after a couple of weeks things aren't going well, it's not feeling right, we are happy for you to withdraw from the program, and you are able to access a refund on that basis. And that's simply because while we have an enormous amount of pride and confidence in our work, we appreciate it's not necessarily for everyone. And so we don't want anyone to feel as though they can't get involved simply because they're worried about being trapped in something that isn't necessarily going to be a match. Now, speaking of this, we also have the foundation. If you are listening to all of this and thinking this sounds marvelous, but I don't think I have the money, that's fine. We have a target of working with 250 students this year on a reduced fee basis. And we are planning to get to a point next year where for every student we work with on a full price basis, we're also working with a student on a subsidized basis. We managed to reach 93 students last year. Our target was 100. We did have space for more. So if you are uncertain about whether you can come to work with us on the basis of money, please do get in touch. We are more than happy to talk to you about that and find an appropriate arrangement. If you are worried, we are also worried. We don't want to miss out on great students simply because they're worried about cost. And almost finally, particularly because I need to get another drink of water, James, tell us about the podcast.
Okay. Yes. So our founder, here we go. There's the slide. So our founder, if you don't know, his name is Rohan, then our sort of head of consulting, Will. So they have a podcast. I think they're doing it fairly regularly, maybe once every sort of week, every 2 weeks. But they're discussing a lot of sort of interesting topics, both related to Oxbridge and also sort of more generally around sort of academia and sometimes slightly bizarre topics. But it's quite interesting. So they would like us to plug their podcast. I hope I'm doing a good job. So please join them. It is actually quite sort of fun. And you can find details of it on the UniAdmissions homepage as well. I think they've done sort of 5 or 6 so far.
And that's another thing, if you're in the mood to give someone a nice review, I would consider that. I don't, off the top of my head, know when the most recent episode was. But what I do know is they have yet to invite me to come on as a guest, and I'm furious. Absolutely furious. So, on that slightly awkward note, onto the questions. Now, we have already had quite a few questions already, which I'm going to answer almost all of, with the help of James. The only caveat is that some questions will be too detailed for us. They will require me to look things up. They will be dependent on 5 or 6 different variables, depending on your personal circumstances. And if this is the case, if you are someone with a really particular set of personal circumstances, rather than trying to answer your question in this very limited format, we would really appreciate speaking to you directly, because that will allow us to take 20 minutes, half an hour to really understand your situation and give you a proper answer of the kind we cannot hear. So to do this, if you watch the little animation, which hopefully is playing, you'll be able to see how to book a consultation. The consultations are completely free. It's a chance to speak to Will, to James, to Dylan, to whoever else is on the consulting team at the moment. I think there's someone new. Is there someone new now?
We do, yeah. This is obviously a very busy time of year, as you can imagine. So yes, we'd love to speak to you. One thing I should say as well, don't be daunted by it. It's simply an opportunity to have a conversation with you, find out a little bit more about you and sort of what your circumstances are and what your plans are, and to see if it's something we can help you with. Again, like Matt says, often students have really quite sort of specific questions, which is fantastic. But obviously, in the interest of fairness in this kind of format, we don't want to be spending really long time sort of talking about something very specific that's not going to benefit anybody else. So please do get in contact. We'd be really happy to have a conversation with you if you have any questions.
Fab. Thanks, James. So speaking of questions, Abhay Srivastava, if I'm mispronouncing anyone's name, please let me know. But I do enjoy having a go. Has asked whether you need to write a different personal statement for different universities. So the answer here is no. You will apply to 5 universities in the UK. That's the limit. And you write one personal statement for all 5. So it's a good idea to apply for more or less the same subject at all of the universities, so as to ensure that the personal statement makes sense to all of them. If you apply for chemistry in one place, English in another place, and computer science in a third place, it will be very difficult to make a personal statement that makes sense. I think everyone will be confused when they read it, because none of the universities know where else you have applied. And so if you write a strange personal statement, that will be to your disadvantage. So I would say, if you want to study maths, apply to study maths in 5 different places and write a personal statement that's just about maths. The only exception to this is if you are applying to Cambridge, there is the opportunity to write a mini personal statement, an extra one, called the SAQ, which I think we're going to be talking about in more detail in a couple of weeks. So do come back for that, because that's another good example of something I'm not going to go into too much detail about now. Now we have a few other questions. I'm just going to pick out some of the ones that that I know. So Christina asks about applying from outside the UK as a British citizen. So this is interesting because this was my situation when I applied to Oxford. Oh God, nearly 15 years ago. I hadn't really taken that entirely on board. That was a long time ago. George Bush was president. God. Yes. Yes, if you're applying to study at the UK from outside the UK, but you are a British citizen, that's fine. You still count as a home student. From a fee standpoint, from a student loan standpoint. In terms of the statistics we've talked about earlier, it's slightly less clear. I would have to double check, but I would not imagine it would negatively impact your application in the slightest. And I hope you're having a lovely time in Bangkok. I have only been to Bangkok once for about 3 hours while I was on a delayed flight to Guangzhou, and there was a typhoon, and so I got stuck in Bangkok for a few hours. It was very nice, but I've only seen the inside of the airport. Hopefully the rest of it is even better. James, which of these questions do you like?
Yeah, just actually on that note, I would say that if you've got a quite particular situation in terms of sort of home international status, do look up the UK Council for International Student Affairs. They actually have a helpline, and they'll be able to give you a little bit more clarity on home or international status. Sometimes, you have students who are sort of living abroad, but they're sort of British taxpayers, all of these sort of things, do get in contact with those guys. From my understanding, they're pretty helpful.
Thanks,
and
James. That's
no problem.
Much more helpful than my personal experience 15 years ago occurs to me.
But I would say I actually lived in Bangkok for 4 years. And to tie this into another question, whilst I was there, I was working as an Ielts examiner. And somebody here asks, how would you advise a student to practice for the interview? Now, I know, obviously, we're talking about something quite different, but I think what somebody preparing for an interview should always do is to record yourself answering questions. Because, if you sort of have a question and you're thinking about it in your head, how will I answer it? Or even if you write it down, or even if you practice saying it, if you can't go back and sort of listen to it, you have really a good way of analyzing how good that is. If we're talking about language, how clear are you? Are you articulating yourself? Do you think that's the best way to have sort of, given evidence for the thing that you've said? So that would be my tip. For anybody, in fact, even for a UK student, if you're going to prepare for interview, record yourself answering questions and listen back.
Absolutely. It's not very pleasant. Most people don't enjoy listening to their own voice, but it will work. So I fully agree with James there. Lara also has different information on the subject of international fees and British citizens. So it sounds like we don't know. I was very confident in my answer, and it sounds as though I was wrong. I think all the more reason to get in touch with the relevant government body, because it sounds as though things have changed in the last 15 years. I think it was a huge surprise.
I think from my understanding, you have to have lived within the UK for 3 years continuously prior to your application. However, there are some caveats to that, which is why I would recommend the Council of International Student Affairs.
Thanks again, James. Speaking of things that have changed recently, Pankaj asks about the number of seats for international students for medicine, and he mentions outside of the EU. So as far as the UK is concerned, the EU and the rest of the world, it's all the same now. So it will be the same number of seats combined for EU and international students for medicine. I don't, off the top of my head, have the total figure for the UK, but I would imagine less than 1,000, possibly only 400 or 500, maybe a little fewer, because most of the universities will take between 10 and 20 each. It really is a very serious cap. So it's a challenging thing to apply for. I would recommend it, of course, because I think it's a lovely place to live, a wonderful place to study. And also, if you do get into a UK university, particularly Oxford or Cambridge for medicine as an international student, that is a heck of an achievement, because that means that you have beaten literally thousands of other people for 1 or 2 places. But as we mentioned earlier, Pankaj, this is a really good example of a question where it's worth getting in touch and making a consultation, because that will give us time to look up the answer, which is difficult while we're also doing the webinar. Scrolling back up to the top. James, can you take Abe's question about entrance exams?
Yeah, so what if someone graduated with low grades but scores high in the entrance exam? Okay, so the reality is there are benchmarks for the courses, so you do have to hit those benchmarks. I would say, though, we have seen, now I'm not saying that this is typical, but we have seen in some years where a student has been predicted lower than the entry requirements for a course, but because they've done so exceptionally well in their test, the universities have interviewed them and given them a conditional offer based on the entry requirements. So obviously we'd need to find out a little bit more about your situation and sort of what those grades actually are. So yeah, please do get in contact and we can have a look into that. Like I say, we work with students from all over the world, so we're pretty knowledgeable about different curriculums and sort of how they translate to UK. So yeah, please get in contact.
Fab. Thanks there, James. We have a couple of questions from Ninin asks about work experience in terms of applying for medicine. It's always really helpful to have a work experience when applying to study medicine, not least because if you do want to be a doctor, it is a good idea to check if you actually do, because medicine is gross. There's lots of blood and stuff. I would absolutely recommend everyone do work experience just to make sure that it's definitely what they want to do, but it is a really important part of the application. So while it isn't 100% necessary, I would say it is at least 70 or 80% necessary, if that makes sense. Do you agree, James?
Yeah, I do. And I'd also say to students that, don't stress too much if you haven't been able to find real world work experience this year. I think the universities are going to be quite sympathetic to the fact that there is a global pandemic and it hasn't been easy to secure, in many cases, work experience. There are lots of sort of virtual type things that you can be getting on with as well. And I think the universities would like to see that you've at least sort of engaged in some of those. So yeah, do sort of search for those or have a chat with us about that as well.
Yeah, that's spot on. Thank you, James. The other thing to say is that work experience for medicine doesn't necessarily need to be in a hospital. It doesn't necessarily need to be with a doctor. A huge part of what medicine is working with the elderly, working with vulnerable people. If you're able to go and spend a few weeks doing volunteer work in an old people's home, doing charitable work, anything like that is in the kind of broad sense of care is going to be valuable, because it's not going to be about what you learned during your work experience at a hospital. They're not going to be taking you because you're, 2 weeks ahead on, I don't know, injections. They're going to be taking you because you have the right attitude, the right passion. And so taking the opportunity to double check medicine is for you, but also to explore what being a doctor is like. The large part of being a doctor is old people. So there's nothing wrong with just spending that time in a care home and being able to tell a story about how much that care and dignity and health, meant to those people and how important it is to do and how it made you feel as a person. It's all a lot subtler than just having experience of watching someone else do open heart surgery. We've got quite a few questions. We've had a few questions from Lara. Lara asks about legal work experience and also about international requirements. It seems to me, Lara, as though the best thing would be for you to get in touch with us through a consultation, because your questions are fairly specific both to your situation and the course. So we'd love to have a conversation with you directly, because we want to be able to give you the right answers in the right level of detail, which unfortunately I don't think I'm going to be able to do in the few minutes remaining that we have here, as I do try and keep these to as close to an hour as I can.
Very quickly, I've spotted Michael McHale's question about Ielts. So the answer really there is no, but if you have a higher Ielts score, therefore your level of English is sort of higher, so therefore you would be able to articulate yourself better within the interview. That would sort of logically make sense. So you've got to hit the benchmark for the Ielts score, but getting a 9 instead of a 7, it's not going to actually impact your application other than your ability to actually sort of communicate effectively.
Exactly. It's correlated, but it certainly isn't a cause, to use the scientific terminology. Aaron asks about not being able to do work experience because of the horrible virus, and asks about advice in addition to wider reading. I believe this is something we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks. But again, this is a good example of a chance to have a consultation with us, as that will depend a lot on the subject you're planning to study and your existing academic background as to what's going to be most effective. And I think we'll take finally, so we can try and get out of here more or less at 3 o'clock, the question from Ninin about when is best to start the program. Hamza and Sumita and a couple of others. Again, please get in touch with us to book a consultation, and we will be able to give you more concrete answers there. But I need to look up both the answers to both of your questions because they are too complicated. So James, tell us about when is the best time to start the program, and then I think we will make an escape.
Sure. So I think the right time to start, an application is now, really. We work with students from sort of varying sort of distances before their application. We work with a lot of students in the year of their application. We work with a lot of students in year 11. We even work with students in year 10. So again, it'd be really good to get a better idea of you and your plans to give you a real sort of clear answer on that. But actually, the earlier you start, the more of those incremental improvements you can make. Therefore, the higher your chances of being successful.
Absolutely. There is a cliche, I believe it's from Confucius, where he asks, when is the best time to plant a tree? And he says, yesterday. When is the second best time to plant a tree? And the answer, of course, is today. The best time to start preparing for these things is well in advance. And if it's too late to prepare well in advance, then the best time to start preparing is now. Some people might claim that you can be too prepared, but that's never happened to me. Maybe to other people who are more prepared, it has happened, but not yet in my case. So I think that's going to bring us to the end of things. James, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. It's been a pleasure to hear from all of our guests. And next week, we're going to be talking about the law, something that I know very little about, but is very important, which is why I believe Will and Dylan are doing it instead rather than me. So yes, it's goodbye from me, and please join Will and Dylan next week to talk about the law. Please say goodbye, James.
Bye, guys. Hopefully look forward to speaking to you soon.
And it's goodbye from me as well. We look forward to hearing from you in the consultation format, and have a lovely weekend, everyone, and enjoy the Olympics.